Y'all ready?
They're ready.
Are y'all ready? We'll just let who's here talk. Yes.
I guess my question is, we talked about it a little bit on the panel, but how do you make, in kind of the self-interest of Congress people to cut the debt and go after the entitlement spending? Because it kind of seems like once you're elected, you're incentivized not to go after the entitlement spending. So how do you change that kind of cycle of you're really, nobody wants to cut entitlement spending, so how do you get to the politicians to actually want to do that, and how do you get your populace to actually do it?
I think for the majority of Congress, and look, I look at how many votes we get when we have a truly conservative bill or a truly conservative amendment. We tap out at 50, 60, 65. Sometimes we'll get more than that, but that's when we get a truly conservative amendment. That's what we tap out at. So I think it's probably going to take a crisis, for instance. Well, I won't use it for instance, but I think it's going to take a crisis where people say we have to address this because the self-interest is so great. And frankly, Ronald Reagan had it right when he said the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. Why is that? Every program's got a constituency, and the constituency becomes very vocal when you start cutting their programs.
I would only just add, you have to make it about something bigger than some esoteric number. You have to make it hit home, for example, inflation, right? You're not going to be able to truly combat long-term inflation. You might have some ebbs and flows, you can constrain it a bit, but if you don't stop government spending that is profligate and is racking up debt, and the more that we keep racking up interest, the more that keeps piling up, the more impossible it becomes to constrain it, and therefore you have inflation, which hurts every family. So you have to put it in that context. It's not easy to do, but we've, I think, had some success this year, as I mentioned before, breaking that paradigm here with the budget, that, hey guys, we want tax cuts for growth, but you need spending cuts in order to fight inflation.
And I'll add, I think it's also important when you start talking about the candidates. You made a great point that a lot of times we run on that, but then you get elected, and then it becomes a lot harder. How do you overcome that? I think a lot of it comes down to the commitment to the people you're recruiting to run for office, and or do they have that kind of commitment and will come in and fulfill what they've promised their voters are going to do.
Freedom Caucus has been around going back to
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
Tea Party era. President Trump ran on MAGA, then he tried to run on CAGA, American Great Again. What exactly is the difference between Freedom Caucus and MAGA?
You want to take a stab?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I think both of them are rooted in Reaganite conservatism, but just applied to a modern world. I think that both the MAGA agenda and the Freedom Caucus want border security. They want deportations. They'd like to see the welfare state reined in. I think most MAGA people would agree with that as well. That they don't believe that we should have a class of people dependent on the government for subsistence. So I think that there's far more overlap than is oftentimes portrayed between the two movements. Sometimes there are some disagreements, sometimes there's some political disagreements, but by and large, I think the philosophical foundation is actually quite similar.
Yeah, I put it this way. What you're seeing is the evolution, the natural evolution of those of us who want to challenge the status quo and take on the establishment and stop the direction that they're taking the country versus where virtually every American we know wants to take the country. Go all the way back to 2009, Obamacare, too big to fail, then the rise of the Tea Party. And then we start electing candidates like Mike Lee or Rand Paul or Marco Rubio, or then in 2012, Ted Cruz. Keep fast forwarding, 2015, the Freedom Caucus is founded. Then you have this whole evolution. President Trump comes on the scene in 2016 and Make America Great Again. And that evolution has continued, and now ever since, and through the speaker's fight, and now what we're delivering in terms of the big, beautiful bill with paradigm shifts, that's all an extension of the same thing, which is challenging the swamp and challenging the status quo and saying that, things need to change and things need to get back to the Constitution, limit spending, secure the border. And by the way, President Trump called it. It's like common sense. Just restoration of common sense, and that's what we've all wanted for the better part of over a decade, and I think that's the engine of the Freedom Caucus, the Freedom Caucus Network, and I think it's the engine of MAGA as well.
Congress has been toiling over immigration reform for gosh, I don't even know how long. You get both sides proposing things, nothing ever comes of it. What needs to happen, if anything, or is the immigration system just fine as it is? It just needs to be enforced.
Well, I will start with the recent raid on not a farm, not illegal aliens picking crops, but a high-tech factory, battery factory, 450, and supposedly most of them, if not all of them, are illegal aliens. It's just like we found out through Doge and our work in the Freedom Caucus. Basically, we've been funding everything. Now we know that illegal aliens may be everywhere. So this 11 million we talked about are probably true. So I say that to say this. People are now starting to question legal immigration. Are we, because when you go to Google, and they have now proven that Google has laid off American workers for cheaper foreign workers legally. So I think we're reaching a tipping point in both illegal and legal immigration that we're going to start protecting American workers more than we have in the past.
It's also the recognition that America first means security first. And you saw Tom Homan last night, he was visiting with us. We've also broken that paradigm. Like for too long, the Chamber of Commerce Republicans were driving the train for the agenda on immigration, and it was always about more immigration, and they'd hide behind legal immigration versus illegal immigration, all while allowing our borders to get trampled and be wide open and endanger Americans. Those days are over. The president has delivered that for us, I think, in spades in terms of what he's doing with Tom Homan and Stephen Miller and the DHS and the great folks at Border Patrol and ICE. But we've stopped the flow, we're removing people, and we're focusing on security first. And I think that message is cracking through, and the American people see it. And I think the point that Keith just made about needing to deal with and recognize the problems with legal immigration, it's very real. I mean, we've stood up and dealt with some of the SIV issues and others with the abuse of Afghanistan and dumping people into our country, but other things in terms of, we got like 51.5 million foreign-born people in our country right now. That is the highest percentage in the history of our country, including through the great migrations in the early 20th century. And that is a cultural impact. We're seeing it with Sharia and the advance of Islamists in Texas and throughout the country, notably in like Detroit, Minneapolis, and other places. And we're all coming to grips and recognition that we need to totally revamp legal immigration as well.
Does that mean like tightening it up, or does that
Absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that and say I think that there's a growing recognition amongst a large number of Republicans, not everybody, that the United States is a nation, it's our home, it's not an economic zone. That we want companies to come in and invest in the United States, but to create American jobs, not foreign jobs, to abide by our laws that we set up, and to recognize that we're not only about economic development at the expense of our own unique culture and heritage. I mean, all of the progress and all of the economic flourishing in the United States, the opportunity that we get to experience and benefit from, sits on top of a cultural foundation that is uniquely American, that is rooted in real historical development of real people, not abstract, libertarian style, faceless economic entities. These are real Americans. And whenever we allow infinity immigration, illegal or legal, that undermines that cultural foundation. It undermines social trust and so many of the, I think, intangible building blocks of what makes America unique. So whether it's H-1B visas being systematically abused in many cases, or whether you're seeing a large number of people coming in from utterly unassimilable cultures, that's a real problem, and I think that we do need to tackle it. I think it does come with reducing legal immigration substantially, and reforming and actually choosing who we think is going to benefit to come into the United States, who's going to benefit us.
For appropriations, I'm curious, what are the Freedom Caucus priorities, and why are we hearing so much about a long-term CR?
Well, I think you'll see some more formal positions coming out here in the next week, but I think suffice it to say, the Freedom Caucus position is, under no circumstances can spending be greater than current level spending. It must be flat or go down. You're hearing talk of long-term CRs, continuing resolutions, because effectively that's a freeze in spending. We trust the president, we trust his administration to deliver on the policies and the agenda that the American people sent him there to do. They've been demonstrating that over and over again in their policies, and shutting down and removing bureaucrats and changing and getting rid of DEI and woke agenda at the Pentagon and everything else. And so at the end of the day, if you're holding spending frozen while you go grow the economy, you're winning, because you've got a president that's willing to go take on the bureaucracy in the swamp. Now, I'd love to pass appropriations bills with massive cuts, but we got to get it through a Senate with Democrats, and you got to get 60 votes in the Senate. So that's why you're hearing that. That's why you're going to hear more of that in the coming weeks. And I'll just speak for myself personally. I'd totally be great with a one-year freeze in spending for a year. That's a victory for the American people every day and twice on Sunday.
One last Michael, and that's, what are your priorities for the NDAA, and will it be?
You guys, anybody you guys want to take it?
Let you take that one.
So, look, the NDAA, we went through a bunch of amendments on Friday. I frankly have got to go look through the list. That's on my task tomorrow, and on the plane back to DC, we'll be visiting as a Rules Committee on Monday to figure out what all the amendments are. Obviously, we want to advance a conservative NDAA. We want to make sure that it's reflective of the president's priorities and what he's doing. I'm not sure how they'll handle the Department of War executive order in the context of the NDAA, but I'm certainly supportive of the renaming. It was good enough for George Washington. It's good enough for us. Look, there are things that I think need to be dealt with. I mean, for example, we've had some agreements and conversation about moving the ban on central bank digital currency. I think there are some things that to be attached to a moving vehicle like that are critically important. But we also need to make sure they're not sticking in, as they are wanting to do, some bad policies and review that.
One last thing,
Keith?
Well, but before we go, the NDAA is a military bill, national defense. And frankly, we need to make sure that we are prepared to fight the next war, not the last war.
Yep.
Our we only have 5 prime contractors today, and they are tied and married to their legacy systems. We need to be learning lessons from Ukraine, regardless of what you think about the Ukraine war. We need to be learning lessons on the future warfare, because they are innovating in real time. So my priorities on the NDAA, are we giving our small to middle-sized military contractors the wherewithal to become big, to provide the innovation that we need in our military forces? Because at its base, and Chip's right, it becomes the catch-all must-pass bill. But at the base, it is national security in a military sense, and I want to make sure that we're innovating as we should.
You guys have anything? We good? We done?
Thanks.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.